What is the actual purpose of the Hunger Games? It's pretty obvious that the Hunger Games are a punishment of some sort towards the districts, but to what end? Because they are games, they are entertainment. I think Snow even says at one point it would be much easier just to round up 24 children and execute them all at once. Why games? In the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, Snow eventually comes to the realization that the purpose of the Hunger Games is to serve as a reminder of what is at humanity's core, that there are savages in all of us. The whole world is an arena. The Hunger Games are presented as a microcosm of life, what it means to be an oppressor versus the oppressed. There are 24 tributes and only one victor, a victor who is lauded and valued and celebrated by society, and 24 tributes who become sacrifices and whose names are almost forgotten from history. They become casualties to the greater cause, the greater purpose. There's a very common saying that the winners write the history books, and that is what the victor becomes. They are the only name that's really remembered. They are absolutely celebrated every single year. They're brought back out as a celebration of the games every single year. They get to live in the victor's village. They get an elevated level of society, and yet they are still apart from the capital. Because while the Hunger Games are presented as a microcosm of society, the victor isn't the oppressor. They are still part of the oppressed, because the capital has separated themselves from the games entirely, or have they? The capital is the ultimate victor. They are the game maker. They keep the peace through constant oppression, reminding people of their own basest desires to kill and to hurt and to become savages. Why children? Because children are the symbols of hope. Hope for a new future, hope that humanity will prevail, hope that innocence will prevail. The Hunger Games serve to prove that as a lie, that children are just as likely to kill and to hurt because that's their most base need. That's their most base desire in humanity, unless you have someone like the capital preventing that. But the capital isn't outside of the Hunger Games either. Spectators who cheer for murder, who place bets on children dying first, who gorge themselves on violence and brutality, all while actually keeping their physical hands clean. The districts are the savages. They're the real monsters. They're the ones who caused so much death and destruction during the Dark Days. It was the capital who came in and saved everyone and brought around a world of peace. But they have the Hunger Games to remind everyone of what the districts are capable of, to almost scare the districts into submission, even though now the Hunger Games are no longer a fair fight, because they aren't actually representative of life, because they're games. Rarely will you ever find yourself in a kill or be killed situation that is so heavily manufactured. The capital select you, and they kill you if you refuse, or you die anyway in the arena. Death is the only option except for one, and that is the illusion of hope that is so carefully controlled within the Hunger Games. Because Snow knows that hope is incredibly powerful. He knows that hope for a better future, hope for a better life is the only thing that people really clamor onto, that they will latch onto in these dark times, because that is what he latched onto during the war. And so he manufactures this false hope for people, knowing that if they believe that's the only solution, that's the only way out, that is what they will actually fight for. The purpose of the Hunger Games is to prove that when stripped back, what lies at humanity's core is an innate need to kill and to be brutal and to be cruel. It shows that the districts are violent and always would be and always will be unless they are controlled. That the Dark Days were a problem coming from districts who couldn't ignore their baser urges. But not the capital. The capital represent those who resisted the urges, who are a more elevated, more civilized level of society, despite the fact that the capital were in that war. And if the Hunger Games is a microcosm of what happened in that war, then the capital was the victor. And the victor still has to resort to all of these urges. The victor gets to write the history books, but they still participated in all the brutality and all of the violence as well. They still had those same urges. But that's not what is being shown here, because it's a manufactured games, because it isn't actually representative of life. And that's the point. All of the districts are in the Hunger Games, not the capital. The districts are in there because that's the most humiliating thing of all. They all lose anyway. Being a victor in the Hunger Games isn't actually being a victor, because you're still apart from the capital. You still aren't that level of society. You still aren't elevated enough. You still aren't resisting those baser urges. The Hunger Games show that all of humanity is cruel and brutal at its core, and it's for that exact reason that they eventually end. It starts with Katniss volunteering for her sister Prim, and it's sacrifice made solely in the name of love. It starts with Rue helping Katniss survive, the two of them teaming teaming up as a true alliance of people who don't really want to backstab each other, who just want to help each other survive. It starts with Katniss singing to Rue as she died, giving her a moment of peace in the midst of all of this brutality. It starts with District 11 sending Katniss loaves of bread in the arena to thank her for her kindness towards their lost daughter. It starts with Peter willing to die to protect Katniss, with him teaming up with the Careers under the knowledge that he is presenting himself as a sacrificial lamb because he loves Katniss, because in the name of love, he wants her to get home, no matter what happens to himself. With Katniss then helping Peter, making sure that he survives no matter the cost to her own personal safety, because he becomes a liability to her, but she doesn't care. Her survival means less than making sure that she is a good, kind person and helps him as much as she can. With at the end of their first games, Katniss and Peter deciding that there would be no victor at all, because isn't that the whole point? There are no victors. There are just people forced to make impossible choices in terrible circumstances that are rarely replicated, and yet even in those circumstances, they still try to find moments of goodness. Because the Hunger Games project a lie that the Capitol wields to force the districts into submission. Snow claimed that humanity is savage and cruel at its core, but we watched him make choice after choice to decide to become cruel, to decide to become brutal and ruthless. We saw others make kinder choices for the good of humanity, even when it put themselves in danger. We saw them make these choices in the heat of the moment when their own survival was on the line. Snow and Dr. Ghoul and many of the other game makers had made so many choices that led them to become people who resorted to these base urges of being cruel. And so they accepted that these must be all of humanity's basis urges. Because if they're this cruel, then what are the districts like, who are much more savage and less evolved than they are? They are a greater threat because they don't have the level of society and civilization that Snow and Ghoul and everyone in the capital has. The purpose of the Hunger Games was to show that when survival and civilization was limited, humanity would resort to the basest urges to hunt and to kill and to be brutal. Without the civilization and the control of the capital, the districts posed a threat to both the capital and themselves because their innate urges were so cruel. Snow had accepted this. Many people in the capital had accepted this as truth. I'm sure that many people in the districts almost thought this as well, when in actuality, the Hunger Games often showed that what lay at humanity's core more than anything was an innate desire to love.